Hey folks, Brenton Dickinson here with the Digital Literacy course, and welcome to your Week 1 Profcast. We're going to take a look at our weekly schedule so you make sure that you have a sense of that sealed in after our conversations this past week and what's coming up ahead. We're going to look at a big topic and leave some activities and reflection questions for you both to do on your own as a self-guided tutorial, but also what to prepare when you come to class on Wednesday. Okay, so here it is. This week we're going to talk about digital literacy and disinformation. That's our topic for this week's Profcast and teaching time. So just a reminder of that rhythm, that pattern that we have going with the weekly schedule. Now there is a semester schedule. You can actually peek at it on Moodle if you like, but I really wanted to focus on at the first of the year on a weekly pattern. Okay, so Fridays become this kind of planning and reflection day where you look at the week ahead, you look at the week behind you, you see what's due, and you make some plans for yourself. And then beginning on Monday and Tuesday with the Profcast and some readings and things like that. And then on by Tuesday, make sure you have your quiz done. On Wednesday, you're going to be coming to class with having done some activities or maybe things you've had to email me or something like that, but prepared for class on Wednesday afternoon or evening. And then Thursday is a chance you tweet to me something that pops up in class that I've asked you to tweet about. And then again on Friday, there'll be a preview video and the whole week begins again. So that's the weekly pattern we're looking at. I'm not going to talk in this particular Profcast a lot about digital literacy. I think the reading is like it's 2 pages and very clear. And we can talk more about definitions when we get to class. But this sheet, which pops up in your week 1 handout, that whole big reading and activity handout in PDF, this pops up like I think 3 times in different ways, and there are a couple of different activities that are involved in that. So make sure you get to know that. It really leans on these 5 competency areas. And then in the activity boxes, there's a number of individual competencies, but we could really extend that. We could do that for days and days and days filling these out. So information and data literacy, communication, collaboration, digital content creation, safety, and problem solving, right? So these are the kinds of things that make up digital literacy skills, particularly in leadership. However, in another way, I took this fellow, Doug Belshaw, in his PhD thesis, so he's now Dr. Belshaw, did a TEDx at Warwick University, or Warwickshire, I can't remember which, and came up with 8 that he saw, and I've linked the YouTube video for the TEDx talk in Moodle in case you want to go ahead and just check that out for yourself. But this is a screenshot, and he actually, you should listen to what he says in the last minute of his talk to know what he thinks of me doing what I did, which is basically cribbing it and sharing it this way. And so he thinks of cognitive, constructive, communicative, civic, critical, creative, confident, and cultural elements, all connected in digital literacy. And he approaches it in his talk from like memes and ideas that circulate. It works pretty well for this week's content if you enjoy that kind of thing. If you're also struggling with the reading and want another way of thinking about digital literacy, his talk's pretty good. He's a very casual speaker, and his examples make good sense. Okay, so today we're talking about disinformation, and that's the big idea that we want to talk about in this Profcast. Okay, so we're going to be looking at some ideas like fake news, 3 terms: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. We're going to talk about briefly doppelgamers and make some personal connections as we then send you out in the world. Now, in class, we talked about this first quotation that was in your syllabus from N.K. Jemisin. It's, I think, like page 2 or 3 of your syllabus. We had good conversations about that. Now, did you read this one? Did you get to the end of the syllabus where this is on the second last page, I believe? All you know, this is spoken by a character within N.K. Jemisin's book, Walking Awake. All you know is what they've told you, and they tell you so little. It's an interesting thing. How do we get our knowledge? How do you know things, right? I asked this of people during our COVID era. Someone says you should wear a mask, and I say, okay, so will it help? And then they say, yes, it will help. I know it helps. And then I will ask a question like, how do you know? How do you know it helps? And it's intriguing. The answers that I tend to get are not, even something like, well, our chief doctor said, so Dr. Morrison here in Prince Edward Island, Dr. Heather Morrison, or one of the Canada doctors or American doctors. No one yet has said, well, actually, I went and I read these science articles about this sort of thing. What they will do when they say wear a mask or don't bother wearing a mask is actually respond in some other way. So I often had people just say, well, are you like a COVID denier? Just because I asked the question. Are you anti-masker? Just because I asked the question. No, I'm not an anti-masker. I'm not wearing one at home by myself right now doing this lecture. So, I just don't love them enough just to wear them all the time. And I like fantasy and sci-fi. Masks are really important for superheroes and supervillains. Why would I be an anti-masker? If something as simple as a triple sheet of paper on my face can help reduce the impacts of a global and local pandemic, I'd really like to be part of that. I'm just curious about how people know things. When the anti-maskers say that the masks have no effect, when I ask them how they know, the answer is actually usually a bit more complex. They usually provide some sort of information or some sort of fundamental idea. So they will say something like, oh, well, I found it on this YouTube channel, this video, or this podcast, or this news report. And then, or they will say something like, well, the pandemic's not real, so the masks don't do anything. Or a lot of people have said, which puzzles me because it's not the question I asked. I say, how do you know that the masks aren't effective? They're like, well, it's a restriction of your rights, your liberties. Which it is, right? When it's forced, when the government tells us to do it, or an institution like UPEI tells us to do it, it is a restriction of our liberties. But that doesn't actually talk about the efficacy, the strength of what a mask can or cannot do. And so it's been an intriguing period when it comes to information. If all you know is what they tell you, you need to really know who they is, right? Right? It really, really matters who they is if that's all you know. In this case, what this character is talking about is they think if we don't know anything, they'll be able to keep control, and they're right. So ignorance is a control mechanism for people in power. How can you want something you've never seen, don't have words for, can't imagine, is the big question in this thing. So trying to push out of ignorance to see something bigger. That's the challenge in this case. What we're talking about this week is the they. If all we know is what they tell us, well, the they really matters. How do we know what we know? How do we find out things? How do we gauge our materials? And we're going to be talking in big ideas ways, and I'm not ending this talk with like 6 steps to make sure that the news article you read online is true or verifiable. That's really for you to do, but this should lead you to that point. Okay. So when it comes to when it comes to ideas, information, we've got, I went to Google Analytics. They have a Google Trends, which you can use for free. They also have one for books, an Ngram search for books. And so I went to Google Analytics and picked the last 7 years, and I wanted to look up the phrase fake news, which is one that was in your reading this week. The reading is 3 or 4 years old, and so I just wanted to see kind of where things were at. And if you take a look at the trend, it's kind of an intriguing trend line, right? We have fake news has a real significant spike at this period here, at the end of 2016, early into 2017, and then has kind of slid back. Now, I'm using the United States where, the best data is there because there's just so much data. People are all using the same language and same technologies and things like that. When I add conspiracy theory, which is a term that's been talked about a lot lately, we can kind of see it's been pretty standard. If you go actually back further, it spikes right after the 9/11 attacks in September of 2001 in New York City and Washington and other places. If you go back, there's a real spike for the few years after that. But in this case, if you look at the trend line, it kind of goes, and then there's this pop-up where it starts to kind of work and match with fake news. It's an intriguing thing. And if you, in the Google Trends, the analytics are kind of terrible, but this is a simple tool and it's free. If you go and you look up the related queries, the searches in the United States related to conspiracy theory, what you got is QAnon, which is a terrifying conspiracy theory group here in North America, in Canada and the US. We got coronavirus is really dominating the next 3 things. And then Avril Lavigne, which I think is a pretty pretty hilarious thing. But, I mean, it's fun to look up. Okay, this is the United States trend line of both conspiracy theory and fake news. We can see how they go, and there's these kind of blip moments that are interesting. But I should note that Canada isn't that much different. If you take a look here, like this trend line here looks very similar. I'll put them here side by side with the US one and the Canadian one, and you can see that they're tracking. So Canada is largely imbuing a certain kind of culture, media culture, in a similar way to the United States. Maybe that's concerning. Canada does have quite a lot of cultural distinctions, but notice that the trend lines are kind of similar. So what's going on? If we pick on kind of certain key areas, what's happening here? We want to ask what happened in like late 2016, early 2017, what happened in springtime of 2020, and what happened in early 2022. Okay, well, what happened? Well, I mean, 2016, 2017, remember this is US and Canadian data. In 2016, 2017, we saw the rise of Donald Trump, who actually used the phrase fake news as a particular kind of tool to avoid addressing certain kind of ideas, to avoid talking to certain kind of reporters. Trump rejected that whole kind of long history of politicians lying to the public or misinforming the public or avoiding questions by going out and answering the question they intend to answer. That's been the platform of how politicians work. President Trump then running for election and then being elected and becoming president, left that behind, and when he did not like something, if it didn't feel right, if he didn't believe in it, if he didn't want to know about it, he just called it fake news. He didn't debate about the truth or the verifiability of anything. He just said it was fake. Okay, it was just done. Including here, this picture is from his first briefing with the press on as he moved towards after his inauguration in 2017. And so this line of things worked out pretty near. Now, some of the conspiracy theory in that is that Donald Trump, had pushed for years that Barack Obama wasn't really born in the United States, the previous president, and so he was involved in that kind of conspiracy theory idea. And we'll talk about those in a bit. Okay, well, early 2020, well, we have actually the outgoingness of, or the last year of the President Trump's reign in the United States. In 2020, there's going to be an election late in 2020. We also have the outbreak of coronavirus. Like, it first shows up in early 2020. This is the press conference after the picture of the press conference after the first death, with the vice president, the president, and then the United States leading Dr. Fauci. So, who was in charge of coronavirus response? That Dr. Fauci was. And what was really interesting was initially President Trump had responded kind of powerfully to coronavirus, or at least with some openness, but immediately kind of shifted and began to talk in language of fake news and conspiracy theory as people's rights became restricted. So as there was a stay-at-home order in New York City, and actually quickly after New York State, a stay-at-home order, a kind of a lockdown or shutdown of things, which stopped economic movement, which is really important to President Trump's way of looking at things, and restricted freedom of movement. I was teaching a course in New York City and digitally at the time, and my students just before the lockdown just kind of went over everywhere in America. They fled the state. They fled the city. I mean, it was really a powerful moment. And then that actually began to grate against the president, and his fake news language was no longer quite as effective with the public. He ended up losing the election later in the year, and I have very little doubt that if he had been a COVID leader, a response leader, that he would have won that election. In 2020, he lost the election, and then he called the loss a fake loss, right? So this has been his way of thinking throughout the time. The third event, actually, in early this past spring, there was another coronavirus movement. There were new coronavirus conspiracy theories and ideas, so that was still there. Donald Trump there's this research into Donald Trump, some of his actions leading up to, there was a mini revolution or insurrection that happened in early January of 2021, and there was investigation into that. So there was this kind of language is still there, but really it was really the big one was Russia's invasion of the sovereign territory of the Ukraine. It's a rigorous, this is a real war. It's really happening. And the way that Russia responded is how it had been responding to Ukraine for years and years and years. Russia had been using disinformation in Ukraine in campaigns and through digital media manipulation in the Ukraine for years, trying to get them to distrust their government, trying to get them to connect back to Russia. And then when Russia invaded the Ukraine, the Russian government used a number of ways in the public of saying that actually the Ukraine's not telling the truth about the invasion, the West is not telling the truth, and so they basically said that the fake news, the Ukraine war was a fake news war, that the Russia's response to a problem, as they put it, was not being captured truly in the media, and so fake news there, and then a number of conspiracy theories have popped up around the war in the Ukraine. Okay, well that's all really kind of intriguing. It's also intriguing to know that that the Ukraine government in 2015-2016 brought an institute together to help begin to respond to false news, fake news claims, disinformation propaganda wars that were happening on the internet and live in person. They began that response 5 or 6 years ago because they knew that Russia was manipulating them. And there's some good data to show that Russia has Russian troll farms, or Russian, the use of Russian-backed manipulation of elections has happened globally, including the United States and Canada, especially the United States, and in Canada's last election, federal election, and in the United States' last 2 national elections. So that's intriguing. It's all kind of part of this world. So we have fake news, we have misinformation, we have propaganda warfare, we have warfare that's happening on the ground for real people are being killed or starved or starving to death. But it's also happening in the digital world, a warfare of sorts to win. And there are certain figures that come to the forefront of this sort of thing. There's also conspiracy theory thinking, and this is basically something to kind of think about that fits in this. We have fake news, disinformation, all that kind of conversation that's happening. Then we have conspiracy theory is the idea that the reason there's a misinformation that's happening by the government or by the media is because there's a quiet, secret group that's working behind that to make that happen. Okay, so all those are at play. It was interesting, in early 2020, they began seeing some problems with misinformation, disinformation around coronavirus. Again, this is American data, 2 articles that you can find in the slideshow, in this PowerPoint. One from Forbes, but the data is done by Statistica, and the other by Nature magazine. These are large data projects, okay? So one asked the question of what are the most common coronavirus conspiracies. The biggest one back then, by far, was miracle cures. People were going out and purchasing certain things that they thought would help them against the coronavirus, or help them if they got sick. I mean, the president at one point said that, well, you could drink bleach as a way of killing the coronavirus. The doctors said that that wasn't true, that the president wasn't sharing scientific information there. But the idea of miracle cures has continued to this moment, right? To this day. And I'm not just talking about, like, here in North America, and in Europe, there are naturopaths, so people that really want to use more natural medicines. And so if I say I have a headache, I have some of my friends would offer me aspirin or Tylenol or ibuprofen. I have other friends that would say, suck it up and just kind of put up with it. And I have other friends that would open up their garden to me to help provide some relief, right? And so it's not just that. It's not that latter group, but it includes some of them, but people that just genuinely are hoping for some kind of miracle cure. But there are other things, including beliefs that like there's this secret group that rules the world, that they've created this as a hoax. So the coronavirus itself is a hoax. It's not real. Or that they've created the virus itself and put it out in the world, right? One of those two things. Same thing, some said that that no one believed, or very few people believe, the Democratic Party, the Liberal Party in the United States, actually created the coronavirus, but they believe that it didn't exist. It wasn't happening. So that was 3.6% of Americans at the time. Some believe that it was a bioweapon from China. Some believe that Gates did this, Bill Gates, who started Microsoft, and other kind of conspiracies, including people that believe the Jews did it, that this was a government population control mechanism, or Dr. Anthony Fauci in the previous slide's picture is basically making it up. Okay, so things like that, and then you can look up some of those other ones, and then so those conspiracy theories. That's an interesting set of survey data. But that's survey data based on 1.1 million articles that were reviewed. So this is not like asking people what they believe, but actually looking at what's in the data. And then and Statistica used a number of institutions for that, including Cornell University and the New York Times. Now, another part of this is data collection that looks at fact checking. So there are news organizations or anti-news organizations that check facts, or political watch groups that check facts. Is somebody telling the truth? And this is kind of a cool little thing in Nature magazine, which you can follow the link and take a look at that data from the spring of 2020, where they fact-checked a number of kind of things and based upon these same sort of things. This would be like what governments say. So there's a lot of misinformation or false information there. Causes of coronavirus, conspiracy theory thinking, miracle cures, how it spreads, or the relation of it spreads. And then there's sadly, there's a lot of misinformation about symptoms. Someone looks up a symptom and the information they're looking at isn't telling them the truth, right? So someone sent me an article that said, everybody that's had coronavirus had ibuprofen in their system, so don't take ibuprofen. Well, I don't know what to say about that. A lot of people take ibuprofen when they're feeling terrible, and that's what happens when you get coronavirus. It was the weirdest thing for someone to send, right? There was no, first of all, a link isn't the same as causation, but there was no scientific evidence behind it, right? And so on. And so this fact-checking set of groups is kind of an interesting study. Now, when it comes to conspiracy theory, that there's this group behind everything. YouGov did a kind of article where they took survey data, and I just want to show this because these are global phenomena. They have a number of other categories. This is an interesting article to read. But the first question was about the harmful side effects of vaccines. Now, this was asked during coronavirus, but it was asked about vaccines, like, is the government hiding the harmful side of that, or reducing or trying to keep you from knowing the harmful side of the side effects of vaccines? Well, look at the result, right? We have South Africa, Nigeria at the very top, Turkey, Egypt, so countries around the Mediterranean there, and then we have Mexico, Saudi Arabia, etc. We have the U.S. at about a third of people thought that the government was hiding these things, which is really intriguing. Canada, not that far behind at 29%, even though it's much lower in the thing. And then Brazil, okay, at 26%. The UK at 19%. Well, what's really interesting is there were real concerns, right, about the Saudi Arabian or the South African and Nigerian governments and their response to coronavirus. Real concerns about Turkey and Egypt. Turkey being actually a country that limits free speech in certain ways. So it's a funny question, do you doubt that the government's telling you the truth? Is that because you think they're hiding it out of incompetency, out of control? What's going on? But this is kind of the way people think. But it's kind of like a thing. I felt that here in Prince Edward Island, that the side effects were on the website, but in public conversations, the doctors didn't spend a lot of time talking about the side effects. Now, am I going to say that the government's intentionally reducing the harmful side? I'm not so sure. I went and looked it up myself to find out what the risk was before I went and got vaccinated. Okay, the second question is on global warming. So global warming and climate change, this huge question that's been a part of the last 50 years or so of our conversation, maybe 60 years. This question isn't, do you believe that the science supports the fact that there is increasing climate change or something like that? That the climate is changing more rapidly, or that humans are causing climate change. That's not the question. The question is, like, and there are Canadians like who believe that the science says that climate change is not factual. Okay, it's not actually happening, or not happening anywhere near the degree that people say it is. Okay, so there are people that believe that. That's not the question. The question is, do you think it's a hoax, right? That anthropogenic or human-made global warming or climate change, is that actually a hoax? Is it basically they're invented to deceive people? That this is the nature of a conspiracy, right? And this is an amazing question. I mean, only 9% of people in the UK, or 14% of people in Japan believe this, but 18% of people said that they thought that climate change wasn't just wrong, it was actually a hoax, that the whole thing was developed as a way to, do something globally, right, as a conspiracy. And in that number, as we go up, we can see there are a lot of kind of governments that are doubtful about the information they put out, or about their response to climate change and things like that. Nigeria, there is a lot of doubt in Nigerian public about their government, so they tend to doubt everything about the government. But look at the United States, this powerful, huge machine, and 27% of people in that country believe it's a hoax. So these are the kinds of questions that we have when it comes to misinformation and things like this. What do we want to do with this? Okay, I'm going to leave you some questions and thoughts about that. This is connected now to your readings especially. All right, can you tell the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Here's what I mean. Misinformation is where I'm saying something and it's not true, but I probably think that it's true. I don't mean to be lying about it, or I'm mistaken. Okay. Disinformation is when I say something and, I know it's false, but I'm using it anyway for some kind of reason. Okay. Now, this is what the reading calls disinformation disorder, or information disorders. And they break the information disorders up into these kind of 7 groups, and we'll just kind of go through some of these examples here. But one of your jobs this week is to bring to class an example of one of these 7 things to talk about with your group. Okay, so find one of these things. So for example, you could bring to the class, just on your phone or your iPad, or on your laptop or something, or print it out if you want. If you have a magazine, bring it in. An example of satire here is The Onion, which is like a parody or satire magazine. It's done it for like years. I don't know how long it is. And we know that we can guess that this is a joke, right? Congress, the United States Congress hires a drummer. But it's a funny article that's critiquing the government within that sort of thing. And then, but it also gives activity about the weather, right? I mean, you have to look at the details of that. And then this news article, government to NASA, the space agency, keep on spending, you're doing great. No government's ever said that to NASA. NASA spends a huge amount of money. And then here's something kind of like, is it cruel, right? So, snipers, when they occasionally break out and kill a bunch of citizens or soldiers or something from a hidden spot. Police unimpressed with rooftop sniper, says an official. It's been done before. So is this a critique of the police, right? That their response to the rooftop sniper is that, he's not being creative enough? Is that how you want police to respond? Okay, so satire and parody. This is an example that, they don't intend to mislead people, but they do that by misleading people, right? Do you see the difference? Okay, so that's misinformation. Sometimes there are false connections, is when headlines or visuals don't support. So here in this old article, first-time voter waited 92 years to meet Trump. What happened next is amazing. So that's clickbait too, right? But like the article, the pictures aren't connected at all with what's inside, if you take a look at the article. Then there's misleading use of information to frame an issue to an individual. So this is an example, 18 to 24-year-olds and how they voted within the 2015 general election, and then how that's being used. And this is the statistical analysis of this had some roots in reality, but it gets bent and then being reused in order to back their idea. But it doesn't align if you take a look at those things, and that can happen. Then there's imposter content. So we're moving now from misinformation into disinformation, certain disinformation. This is imposter content. This is when genuine sources are impersonated. So BBC tweeted out here, BBC Africa tweeted out, said, look, there's a lot of people circulating on WhatsApp things about the Kenya election using our storyboard, right? This is not it, right? This is you should know that it looks like a BBC video, but it's not a BBC video. Okay, now BBC Africa uses fake news. It's interesting. Your article says, talks about using fake news. That's a problematic thing, even though we kind of know what it means. That misinformation, disinformation, these are better terms. They're clearer, right? Then we can talk to one another. Fake news is not going to help us much as we think about these things. Then there's manipulated content. So this is like a genuine lineup for people to vote in the United States. This is generally the border control officer genuinely arresting somebody, okay? But this person connected those two things for a political thing. An illegal trying to vote has been arrested, like an illegal alien, right? This is a person who's wants to claim refugee status, or is working in the United States without the right paperwork, or living there without paperwork, or snuck across the border for a better life, or to get a job, or to connect with their family, or whatever. An immigrant who's not fully registered. And so this person has a political idea and wants to spread that political idea, and has made a connection that's not there. So that's that kind of disinformation. Then there's full-on fabricated content. So this, for example, was looked like a tweet. So Hillary voters get to vote via text, but Trump voters have to go to the polls. Not fair. Okay, so it sounds like it's about fairness and things like that, but this is all not true. You couldn't vote in the United States 2016 election by texting somebody. I mean, like, what kind of security is that? You couldn't vote except by going and voting, right? That was the only way to vote. But this was a way of this was set up to make it do two things: to make it look like the Hillary Clinton campaign was unfair, that the system was out to get you, that kind of unfairness, right? And then second, so to discredit Clinton and the system, but then secondly, it was also meant to discourage Hillary Clinton voters from actually going out, but instead, an hour before the polls close, they're like, okay, I'm busy, I'm just going to tweet or text my vote in. And of course, that's not true, right? So this was designed to do harm, set up to do such a thing. Okay, so those are some of those examples. I'd like you to bring one to class from something you love, something you do, from your world that you know. And I also point you back to this particular graph that's in your piece, because it adds the definition malinformation. And malinformation is when you publish something that probably is rooted in reality, but it's meant to hurt somebody. So like revenge porn, outing somebody, about their sexual identity or religious identity as a way to cause them harm, things like that. That's what we call malinformation. Now, to think about those things, I'm going to show you this chart that's also in your reading, but this is like always the reality of things, okay? So when you read something, there's a writer or a group of writers and the text itself creating something, and then it goes out into the world in some sort of publication, and then it gets shared out in the world. So when we think about information and misinformation and disinformation, we need to think about all those three layers, all those three aspects, because you have the content that's been created, then as it's remade or shared, it can change. They can change the content of it. They can change the words or images. They can mash it up. They can select parts out to make it do new things. And then there's a distribution, right, when the thing goes. And then there's this circle, right, of remaking and redoing. And so you can see this with this article by a website that's no longer there, or a news organization that's no longer there. Pope Francis shocks the world and endorses Donald Trump for president. like, I mean, I can't think I've ever heard of a pope endorsing anyone in any of the American elections. There's just not that many Roman Catholics in the United States compared with, say, the southern hemisphere, right? Latin America, Africa, Asia has 500 million Roman Catholics, right? So, like, I don't know why they pay attention to the small population in the U.S. to that degree, but it just wasn't true anyway. Pope Francis didn't do such a thing, and this was set up. I don't know, was it to make Donald Trump look more legitimate or to make him look less legitimate? Whatever, it was totally false, totally fabricated. Okay, so in that creation, production, distribution, there's that whole reproduction phase. So, like, I write an article, right? Or somebody writes an article, it goes out into the world. So in this case, this article goes out into the world. It was shared initially on Facebook, who worked for this group, but it began getting reshared, not just on Facebook, but all over the place. And in fact, got like downloaded and manipulated again and so on, and shared over and over again. And it was actually shared by Trump supporters. So that's how they read it. So even though some Trump supporters are anti-Catholic, they were using this as a kind of a moment. And it was also shared by Russian trolls and some of the digital bots. And then it just kind of grew. And then Hillary Clinton, her team shared it as a to show how like the problem, right? And Trump supporters are easily fooled. And so it gets reshared, but this time to make fun of the Trump supporters who were so gullible to believe it in the first place, and so on. So it keeps getting shared, and it just doesn't go away. And most people are reading information so quickly, they're just not thinking about it. Okay. So these are the kinds of things we're thinking about with disinformation. I really look forward to the conversation that we're going to have this week in class. So here's what you do. One, I want you to bring, as I already said, an example of information disorder, one of those 7 boxes, to class on Wednesday. We'll use as examples all together or in small groups. Do your doppelganger search. So a doppelganger, and this I just took. This is a logo from an art exhibit called Doppelganger from a few years ago, where 2 people with the same name are online, have online content, and people get confused between them, and it ends up kind of being a problem or being fun. In this case, they were drawn together, people just for fun, for an art exhibit. But if you take your name and look for it online, see if you can find somebody else like that. What would it be like if your future employer or your future partners or friends confuse their content and your content, right? Like, it wouldn't matter, right? If someone with your exact name turns out to be a secret Nazi and has a great big online presence, you need to think about how you live, right? So that's the kind of thing. So look up your doppelganger. We'll have some fun with that in class. There's an exercise. One of the activities was to look at the digital literacy skills and kind of rate them and select what you think is most important. We'll talk in class. Come thinking about what digital literacy skills matter the most to you now, and which ones will be most important when you graduate. So we're going to do all that on Wednesday as part of the conversation. This is the list of this week's activities, right? So it's all in that one handout. You can, this video is not, obviously, but everything else is in the handout. The links from the conversation today are in the slides. So if you want to follow any of those up, that you can just find them in the PowerPoint slides. There are 2 super short readings, and then there are a few activities. Some of them are fairly quick, like the competency self-evaluation activity is very short. But then there are a series of 9 different kind of scenarios, and what I want you to do is take those scenarios, link them up with the digital literacy competency self-evaluation, and give me an example of that. The instructions are at the top of page 15 in the PDF. So, and then email it to me, and it can be a fairly simple email, like scenario 1, ... just very quick. You don't have to spend a lot of time talking about it. It should be just basically 9 bullet points. Okay. So send me that email before class on Wednesday. Make sure that comes in before class on Wednesday if you want those points, but you'll need to discuss it in class anyway. And then be prepared to talk about the reflection questions here in the Profcast in the previous slide, as well as the ones that are on page 24 of the PDF. Okay. Don't forget the quiz by Tuesday at 5. It closes, totally, absolutely closed after that. You have 10 minutes to do the quiz. I tried it a few times and I was able to do it in under a minute. So that gives you a little time to look at your notes and things like that as you're doing the quiz, but make sure you do finish it, okay? And I've already asked you to tweet something after class on this past Wednesday. So I look forward to your tweet connections, hashtag ACLC 1080, and make sure you connect with me, follow me on Twitter for that sort of thing. And then also prepare some reflection questions based on this. So look forward to all these things. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to contact me. I am in office on Tuesday from 10 to 11, and but I can also make some other time as well as before our sessions on Wednesday. Okay, look forward to talking to you again, and make sure that your information is accurate. Cheers.